All right, so unfortunately, the camera file that was pointed at me got corrupted while editing this podcast. I tried 1,000 things to save it, didn't work. Fortunately for you, you get to look at Kiefer this entire time. So I hope you guys do enjoy this podcast. Sorry about that. Maybe just listen to this one or just look at Kiefer the whole time. Like, subscribe if you are new. Enjoy. This is the first episode, by the way, of this series that I want to do.
It's a lot of pressure.
It's a little bit of pressure.
That's all right.
So why don't you introduce yourself and give people a little bit of a backstory about what you do?
Sure. So my name's Kiefer Lammi. I'm as of 3 months ago, I'm a strength coach or CrossFit coach for Prvn Fitness, based out of Las Vegas, but working with some games athletes, some up and coming athletes, and trying to do a little bit more on the team to help support like the growth of the rest of our coaches and our business.
Awesome. How did you get into coaching CrossFit?
Like kicking and screaming, to be honest.
Yeah.
I come from a traditional sports background, so I played college basketball, went to school for exercise science, started off convinced I was going to be in strength and conditioning for pro sports or college sports or work in a private sector setting with athletes from that side. And the transition happened kind of out of nowhere where I had made a job change pre-COVID, didn't totally work out. Girl I was dating at the time was really into CrossFit, started working out at the gym with her, and the owner of the gym approached me and wanted me to coach weightlifting classes at first.
Wow.
And post-COVID, when they reopened the gym, when everybody had to be in their 6 foot square and you had to like have a certain amount of social distancing, they cut out all the weightlifting classes. And so they basically were like, if you want a job, you have to coach CrossFit now.
Yeah.
And so I started off in an affiliate setting for a while, began programming for the gym, got really interested in the sport side of things because that's what I came from, is like working more with competitive athletes, being a competitive athlete for myself. That was where my interests were. So I slowly just started trickling away from the affiliate side more into the sports side, and now a couple years later, here I am.
Yeah, so how did you go from like coaching, I guess I don't want to say the average Joe, but basically average Joes of CrossFit into the more professional side of it?
I don't know that there's not like a planned trajectory for it. Because I think this is one of the questions I get asked from friends of mine who coach at gyms, is like, hey, how'd you get started coaching athletes?
Yeah.
And a lot of it was just having a big interest in sport, because my brain is more wired to think about how to optimize things for performance in a competitive setting, right? So I had an interest in it. But secondarily, I just happened to be around people that were competitive athletes, and some of the people I was hanging out with, I was at Invictus in Boston, and so I became really close with Tola Moraquinho and Kelsey Keel, and through that met their coach, and we just hit it off really well because those are the conversations I like having. And so my interest just turned more into a job, started working with athletes that wanted to make quarterfinals, and then athletes that were making semifinals, and then eventually some of those athletes are making the games, and that just became what I was doing.
That's cool. That's really cool. So who was the other coach that you like had met?
Oh, so I worked for a long time with Justin Kotler from Underdogs.
Yep.
And that was my start in the competitive side of CrossFit up until recently when I made the move to Prvn.
Okay, cool. Going from like the whole point of this series that I'm trying to do, right? We talked about it a little bit before, is talking about the differences between like traditional S&C versus CrossFit proper, or even CrossFit the competitor side. I don't know if you paid attention at all to like kind of the climate of what's going on, but it's something that I've kind of seen. Like Miranda came out a couple weeks ago, what's her thing again? Street parking, and then she was talking a lot about the methodology of CrossFit and what that means. And so I've been trying to talk to people from both sides to get a good idea of like what exactly it is about CrossFit that has people bought in so much, and why people think that it's like magical, basically, right? Like why it's the magic pill. And a lot of times what I think happens is people get lost in language in CrossFit versus traditional S&C.
Yeah.
Because you hear so much that when you get into a conversation with somebody that's in CrossFit, they're always like, you just don't understand the methodology. And that's the answer for everything, right? And so you have an exercise science background, you said? You have a bachelor's degree?
Yeah.
Okay. So you always hear I like to call it an excuse of you just don't understand the methodology or you don't understand it enough. But I'm looking for like the answers, right? Like what exactly is it? So what do you think first is the thing that buys people into CrossFit? Maybe it's emotional, physical, whatever it is, so much that they're willing to like die on the stake over it.
honestly, I think the thing that draws people into CrossFit is just the fact that it's more fun in a sense of like you're showing up to do this thing with other people. We talk about the community, you can talk about whatever it is, but CrossFit has found a way to sort of gamify fitness where when you come from traditional strength and conditioning, it's very linear, sets and reps, periodized over time. You're not really scoring things, we're just measuring weight on the bar over time, and like you don't get the same satisfaction out of that. And often you're isolated. Like in the strength and conditioning world, we talk about things as being very individual, you do it on your own. Well, in CrossFit, you're coming in, you're doing the same workout with a group of people. You're doing it for time in a sense where we're able to measure against yourself, but also against your peers. Even if they're your friends and you're not trying to be competitive, there's still a competitive nature to it.
Absolutely.
And so I think that the bond over like the shared suffrage of what you're doing, to me, as somebody coming from the outside going into it, is the magic pill. I think that, yes, there are parts about the methodology that are superior in a lot of ways for the general consumer to strength conditioning, which we can talk more about, but I don't think that's the thing that's working the most for everybody. I think it's the fact that it's that much easier to show up when you have the other people doing it, when you have this excitement or the incentive of racing against the clock and against others.
So that's something, dude, that I've been trying to explain to people too, is that I don't think there's anything special about CrossFit proper itself. What I think it is that you're in a community setting, which is unlike anything else, because basically CrossFit is church for a lot of people, right? They've done a really good job at developing that side of things, opposed to F45 or Orange Theory. Like, it's like community based, right? Orange Theory, F45, I'm sure it's kind of like you get in, you get out. It's not really like a family setting.
I think in a lot of ways, I haven't spent as much time in those communities, but I'd venture to guess that the people aren't forming the same relationships when they show up there that they are when they show up to CrossFit. And I do think there's some, one of the arguments people have against the CrossFit methodology is they feel like they're not maximizing any of the things you're doing if you're trying to do everything all the time and you're trying to blend these things together and you have this constant variance as you go. But if you take a step back, like to try to figure out how somebody could actually optimally strength train or optimally endurance train or optimally do any of these different things takes more time than most people have to show up. And so the idea of showing up for your 1 hour class, the idea of having this variance over the course of the week so you're touching on all of these qualities is probably the best way that you could level up everything a little bit in a more balanced way that's better for your health overall. If you think about like video game characters, like the power lifter is really high on this end and really low on the other end. The endurance athlete is really high on this end and low on the other end. Like, a CrossFitter, especially at a class level, is not as optimal in any of those areas as anybody else, but they've checked the boxes of everything much better than somebody that's in just one bucket or the other.
So can we talk a little bit about the terminology in CrossFit? And what it means to you or to other CrossFitters. Constantly varied. They say it's not random. Can you explain that a little bit to me? Because even when I hear constantly varied and it's not random, there's a purpose behind it, I'm like, okay, because something that you just said to me really rings true. You cannot get better at a specific, like, it's the law of specificity, right? Like, you can't get better at something if you're not constantly doing that thing. So it might be possible, but it's probably not super likely that if you're, conjugate method, right? Obviously. Okay, so a lot of times what they're doing is they're changing the implement or the type of bar rather than the type of bar rather than the implement, right? So it's like, you're probably not going to up your back squat if you're going to do a kettlebell front rack squat. Do you agree with that?
If you're not also doing back squats.
Exactly. So, and I think that in the normal class, which is just like, we're talking public CrossFit first, right? I don't understand what the constantly varied argument is when they say it's not random, it's constantly varied, because still to me it seems, no, it's random. That's okay, that is random, but do you get where I'm trying to go?
I think, and I'll say it first, like, I would not consider myself to be an expert in the methodology to the extent of some other guys that will be able to go to bat for it. But as somebody who would have considered himself more on the strength conditioning side before and having fully bought into the idea of CrossFit, I think for me the idea is that random implies that there's no intention at all. There might be an implied randomness over the course of the week, but what's random is that what's varied about it is that we're varying the stimulus every day, so that when you look back over the course of 10 days, of 14 days, of 21 days, that you've intentionally touched on all of these different things, your different movement patterns, your different time domains, your different intensities, in a way where we've actually accessed all of that stuff over time. And in that, I don't think you can call it random, because it's intentional that we're doing all of those things.
Sure. So I guess a point of contention that I have with that, right, is that if you're even varying time domains, right, how are you going to get better at those time domains? Because, you know, on a normal strength and conditioning program, it'd be a linear periodization, kind of like what you just said, right? So if we want to get better at a 6-minute AMRAP, we're probably going to hammer 6-minute AMRAPs or intervals of 3, intervals of 2. But the goal is, the intention is to get better at a 6-minute AMRAP.
But that's not the goal in CrossFit.
Okay.
The goal in CrossFit is to be as best prepared as you can for whatever life is going to throw at you. Right?
Yeah.
And so if we focus specifically on a 6-minute AMRAP, well, what if life suggests that you need to be ready for something that's 30 minutes long? Right. You haven't done that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So it's trying to become the best possible generalist that we can.
Yeah.
Rather than being the best specialist we can in a certain time domain, or a certain strength, or a certain gymnastics capacity.
So the goal, I hear a lot of times that CrossFit is better for your health than other things. Is this something that you would agree with?
How would you measure health?
That's my question. Yeah, that's my question, because it seems that they say the lack of disease, right? So that would be the measure broadly across everybody, right? Is the lack of disease, right? And so to me, it's kind of like, me personally, and now we'll reference like kind of where this inspiration came from, was Tanner Shuck versus Taylor Self on Savant's podcast. That Tanner Shuck said the best thing that anybody can do is strength train. Now, I think the difference between saying the best thing that you can do is strength train versus CrossFit is that strength training doesn't claim to be a modality. Right? So powerlifting doesn't claim to be a modality because there's no set powerlifting thing, right? If somebody says, hey, I'm a powerlifter, you go, so you compete in powerlifting? And they might be like, no. And you're like, oh, so you just lift 3x5 or 5x5 sometimes, right? And they'll be like, yeah, I guess that's right? But when you say CrossFit, there's a whole thing behind it, right? So
if we look at health, or we look at disease prevention, right? We have more factors than just fitness, first of all, that play into it, right? And that is a big piece of the CrossFit methodology, is looking also at your nutrition and your lifestyle outside of the gym. So in that, when people talk methodology, we're talking fitness as one of the big pillars, but we're also talking about nutrition, how you take care of yourself, how you're sleeping, and everything else. When we say health in general, like the factors that are impacting our long-term health, our disease prevention, our longevity overall, are going to include more than just how strong you are. Like, yes, if I had to pick for myself, I'm probably going to choose maintaining my strength over time, maintaining lean muscle mass, because I know that that's going to help as I age. But if I do that at the expense of my nutrition and my body composition, at the expense of having any sort of aerobic capacity, then I might not actually be in the best possible position health-wise that I could be.
Dude, 100%. I can totally get down with that. I think the problem that I have with the CrossFit argument, right, the methodology portion, is that so what you just said, right, was it's implementing diet, sleep, all these different things. Normal people shit, right? Normal, like, health conscious people shit. So it's just everyone who's health conscious doing CrossFit by chance. This is why I think Greg Glassman, by the way, is one of the smartest people ever. Because no longer now do you actually have to make arguments like against or for. You just say, well, CrossFit, what does CrossFit mean? It's a methodology. Okay, what's the methodology? Well, there's exercise and then diet, sleep, all this stuff that goes into it, and making sure that you have personal development goals and all these different things. So I'm kind of like, okay, bodybuilders, not the extreme, right? So let's like we don't have to use the example of bodybuilders to their show date type thing, right? I've done that before. I understand it's not healthy, you know, all this stuff. But bodybuilders who maintain a decent body composition throughout the year, they're eating healthy, mostly fruits and vegetables and, you know, lean meats or whatever. They're taking care of their sleep, but they're doing bodybuilding reps and all this stuff. They're probably lacking disease, right? They maintain at least some form of cardio throughout the year so that they can hold their body composition.
Maybe.
Yeah. I think mostly now, bodybuilders now are mostly pivy to that. Like even the IFBB pros are doing like 30 minutes of cardio a day or something, you know, like walking on a Stairmaster. What do you think? What would be the difference between like that and CrossFit at large?
Even your description there, when you're talking about bodybuilders, is probably more skewed towards comparing to a CrossFit athlete towards CrossFit health, right? So when we take that, like, we talk about, you compare it to powerlifting, you're like, well, that's a sport, just like CrossFit's a sport. You talk about bodybuilding, that's a sport compared to CrossFit sport. CrossFit, as a methodology, I think what Greg created and what it tries to pitch is like the lowest barrier to entry, the simplest version of how you could take care of yourself in all of these domains to be able to check the box and improve your markers across the board.
Okay.
Right? Like, to be able to say that you're doing CrossFit, you have to understand and check the box from a nutrition standpoint. You have to show up to do a workout each day and try to touch on different time domains over time, touch on your strength, touch on gymnastics, improve your range of motion and how you're moving. And that's kind of it. Like, say you're a successful power lifter, what? You have to improve your 1 rep maxes over time. But what else are we measuring? What else are we improving or touching on?
I guess what I would say though with powerlifting and bodybuilding is that if you're in the sport, the objective is not health. And so there's a difference between, because that was something that they brought up a million times on the Savan and Taylor Self versus Tanner, is that they would use the example of strongmen and powerlifters as like a comparison to an everyday CrossFitter, but and be like, they're not examples of health. Yeah, but that's not the intention.
Right. And I wouldn't say that our elite CrossFit athletes are an example of health either.
Hell no, that's the other thing that I have to say too. Yeah, like when you look at these people, they all have aches and pains, and there's probably some sort of like, well, I'm not gonna speculate actually, but they definitely have injuries that they're working through and whatever. And if you're injured, that's not health.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, any sport on a professional level goes past the point of what is sustainable and healthy for most people, and even for them, because you see the shelf life of athletes, right? In order to maximize performance, because that's the goal of sport. I think if we were to strip that back, if you look at across all of the different fitness related sports and you strip back 20% to something that's like, okay, let's get to a more sustainable point, and you look at the things that CrossFitters are doing compared to the things that bodybuilders are doing in that realm, well, a CrossFitter at a pulled back version of that is touching on strength. They're improving their range of motion through the different things that we do. They're aerobically fit across different time domains. They probably have a better balance overall if they're following the methodology from a nutrition standpoint, like guys like Jeff Adler have talked about doing. Like, he's probably one of the few elite CrossFit athletes to still follow zone diet, which is what CrossFit has promoted. I think that we are closer to having a better overall health than you are in the other realms.
Yeah. Okay. So then a question that I guess I would have is, because to be a CrossFitter then, right, you have to follow the diet, you have to follow the methodology in terms of like the exercise, right? And what were the 3 points that you touched on?
The biggest pillars I would say is like follow the exercise protocol and follow the nutrition protocol.
So if there's like a person that's taking CrossFit classes and they don't care about their nutrition at all, are they technically doing CrossFit?
I think you could argue that they're not following the methodology.
Okay.
They're doing CrossFit from a fitness perspective, but they're missing part of the methodology.
Got it. Okay, cool. Another term that I hear often is, let's actually say this. What do you think the barrier to entry for CrossFit is?
Affording a class.
Okay, besides that, because I definitely agree with that. So one thing,
actually, I guess you could take it back, because you don't need to go do an affiliate to be able to start doing CrossFit.
I almost feel like the way that they talk about it, you do.
I think that they want to, because the community aspect of it is a big piece of what drives it, and the coaches are meant to be advocates of the methodology from a holistic standpoint, which includes the nutrition. Like, those are meant to be things that are discussed in class and all of this. So I do think it's a piece of it, but you can certainly get it done without that. But from a barrier to entry standpoint, like, you don't have to have a certain level of strength or a certain level of fitness or a certain level of movement competency to start CrossFit. You need to have some sort of support in understanding how you can look at a CrossFit workout and figure out how you can gain a similar stimulus at your current ability levels. And I think that can be harder for people than it is in other sports, because if you're just doing powerlifting, it's like, okay, I squat, bench, and I deadlift, and if I'm not as strong, I do it lighter, and if I'm stronger, I do it heavier. In CrossFit, if you look at a workout, say you look at Amanda as a workout and it's meant to be something that anybody can do some version to get a similar stimulus, that's more challenging to figure out how that fits somebody that's walking in the door for the first time, for sure.
Can I push back a little bit on that?
Yeah.
So I personally believe that the barrier to anything in life is strength, a base level of strength, right? Just look at it like a simple perspective, right? A simple perspective. A baby has to be strong enough to walk in order for it to walk. In CrossFit, I understand that there's like the idea of scaling and you do what you can, but you still have to have the base level of strength in order to move any sort of load, right? So I would argue...
But what if there's an option that has no external load?
You still have to express force against something, right? So
but are we assuming that if they have the strength to walk in the door and the strength to get off the bed and all these things, you have enough strength to do something that's going to move you closer towards this spectrum of health?
Yeah. So yeah. So yeah. So
I understand.
Yeah,
We're
you
going,
get what I'm saying. It's so nuanced. Yeah.
Point.
Exactly. So like my argument is that, okay, I get it, but if we get to the nitty gritty, always the barrier to entry to anything is just some base level of strength. You have to be able to be strong enough to move your body in general.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the only point of contention that I have with that. When I hear the barrier to entry is any of the 10, what is it called? Can you enlighten me?
General physical skills.
Yeah,
yeah.
When I hear that, I'm like, okay, but to do any gymnastics, you need to be strong enough. To do any aerobic work, you have to be strong enough. Is that something that you would agree with or no?
Yes, but I think we're splitting hairs, because to define what strong enough is, like that same barrier to entry exists for everything.
Yeah, 100%.
So, yes, you have to. I just think that barrier of strength is not much higher than the barrier of strength that it takes to physically get out of your car and walk down the stairs to go into your gym.
Yeah, I agree. Well, yeah, I agree to a point.
Right.
I know I'm getting so nuanced, dude, but I want to understand, because when even like a burpee can be the world for somebody.
Sure.
One burpee. Like you see those really amazing videos where like a 400-pound person gets their first burpee and you like want to cry almost, right? So I think also it does vary depending on where that person is in their life, just in general, right? With health or their fitness.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Another point that I keep seeing brought up is measurable.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that CrossFit is measurable over time? Not for the athlete, we're not quite there yet, but for just the everyday person. When I think about measurable, again, coming from the strength and conditioning background, or predictable. I don't think you can predict anything with CrossFit if it is to be constantly varied. I don't think that you can predict that you're going to get stronger at your 1RM back squat if you're not practicing the skill of 1RM, getting the neurological adaptation to it, things of that nature. I don't think that you can get predictably get back. Now I have to split hairs. Obviously, the person who's obese or the person who's like over fat, and then they lose weight, they're going to get better at their 1 mile. It's just going to happen, right?
Sure.
Over time. But the person who comes in that's already semi-fit, right? Like me, I came into CrossFit. I had a past of powerlifting. I had a past of strongman, bodybuilding, all these different things that I competed in. I didn't predictably get better at anything unless it was a new stimulus. So like Olympic weightlifting, I didn't do before. So predictably, I was going to get better. But with some of this stuff, I'm like, is it predictable? I don't see that it could be.
I would say, if you're going to compare it to a pure strength sport where that's the only thing you're focusing on and you're writing progressions to get better at that thing, no, it's not as predictable. There's an assumption that if you show up every day and you're touching on all of these things over time, that we will see these stimuli often enough that you will get better over time. But it's not as quick and it's not as linear, and so I think it becomes harder to predict. And I think that the more well trained you are, the more fleeting those things can be, which is the same in every sport. But it also may just suggest that, like, hey, maybe the things that you needed to improve the most for your health weren't those things. So you are getting better, just not in those areas, and you like those areas because that's your sporting background. But you're improving your aerobic fitness, you're improving your muscular endurance and these other things that from a health perspective are helping balance you out more and make you healthier overall, rather than taking you from a 400-pound back squat to a 420-pound back squat, which would be cool to have and you want to be stronger, but that's not the intention of CrossFit from a health perspective.
So I got largely worse at powerlifting coming into CrossFit, which it doesn't bother me. Like I used to squat 500, 515 or whatever, and now I squat 405 for a couple on a good day. And my deadlift is nowhere near what I was, but I was also like 30, 40 pounds heavier. And found out that I was pretty good at...
You went from training powerlifting regularly to doing CrossFit. Now, where do you think you would have been at if you went from doing powerlifting to doing nothing? Would you have gotten even worse?
I probably would have got better. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing. There's no way.
So I just think that all of these things exist on a spectrum, and it's not to refute what you're saying at all.
No. Please do. If you hear something, please do.
But if you go from regularly strength training and you're heavier and you're doing it 2 to 3 times a week regularly and you're not doing things that would necessarily maybe interfere with your strength stimulus, you're probably going to lose some of that. Just the same as like when we peak for an event, we're often at our strength to a point that we're not at 4 weeks after that when we're back into a base phase, right? You're not optimized for that thing. But I think that it keeps you, like, I've used this analogy with somebody before of like, when we're doing CrossFit, I've used this with my athletes even, or they're used to training two sessions a day. We take an off season, they're training 1 session a day. They don't feel as fit overall as they are, but they're 8 weeks out from being back to where they would want to be.
Yeah.
Right? I think that I would assume that you are still healthy and strong to a point where if you wanted to dive back into powerlifting, you're only 8 to 12 weeks out from feeling close to where you were again. And you may even find that through becoming more well-rounded, you actually had a better base to be even better than you were before. Maybe.
No, I would actually probably agree with you, right? Because it's just about like, there's certain things in CrossFit that I think a lot of coaches don't really, not to their fault, well, maybe to their fault a little bit, but I just think that a lot of them don't really have the same type of, this is going to sound like kind of cocky or whatever, but they don't have like as much education in strength and conditioning. So I think that some of these terms and stuff can get muddy. But I don't think that, for me at least, when I listen to some of these coaches talk, I'm like, oh, you really haven't spent that much time in like the actual strength and conditioning world, because it's like, anytime that you question anything that has to do with the methodology, you don't like, all you say is you don't understand the methodology, and it's like you can't appeal to authority in your world, but we'll appeal to authority in our world, as in like we're gonna go refer to the L1 now, we're gonna refer to the L2. Okay, but what about these studies like in the exercise world? Well, no, we don't care about that because that's not what the methodology says. Do you
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah,
I went away a little bit from what you were just saying, but yeah, so I think
to the CrossFitters' credit, a lot of the arguments that they make, by and large, are meant to attack the people who are not currently serving themselves from a health and fitness standpoint.
I agree.
And I think that's why so many people get into an argument when they are an expert in whatever level of strength or fitness that they work in. If they're in strength conditioning, if they're in CrossFit, they're in other things. Like, we're splitting hairs and we're arguing about the thing that this was not intended to be for. It was intended to look at sick people who are not active, who are not moving, and figure out the best way that we could serve them on a broad scale.
What do you think CrossFit, what do you think the magic of CrossFit actually is, besides the community aspect? I have a theory on it, but I want to hear yours.
No, you got to give me your theory.
Okay.
And then I'll push back.
All right,
if I
please
have one, or I'll give you another point.
Sure. So community is number one. Actually, community I would say is number two. The first thing that I think is the magic pill about CrossFit is it teaches people who didn't know how to work out or who weren't working out already, or that weren't working out hard, like your average everyday, let's just use the term bodybuilder, although I don't think you're a bodybuilder unless you compete in bodybuilding.
Sure.
It taught those people how to exercise intensely, or see what intensity means, that had never experienced intensity before.
Yeah.
And that's what I think makes the adaptation and the change.
And that's the importance of having the clock and measuring these things.
I agree.
Right? Is that it's forcing you, whether you think that you're racing your clock or not, or racing other people or not, I think it pushes you out of your comfort zone. And I do think that that's when we talk about CrossFit as being an optimal general approach for building strength and building movement competency and building endurance and stuff. It's the ability to take any of these movements, ones that we think of from the strength world, ones that we think of from the endurance world, from the gymnastics world and stuff, and put them into a scenario where we're also getting aerobic intensity. And so we're able to maximize what we can do in 15 minutes most of the time for a workout. I think that's the magic, is like how densely we're able to pack things into a very small package that everybody has time for.
Yes. Okay. So that's another really good point for CrossFit. And by the way, I'm on CrossFit's side. I just want to be the devil's advocate, right? Sure. But I think that there's a lot of holes in the arguments. So I agree with you. I think what CrossFit does is it gives you the most bang for your buck in terms of time. That doesn't mean that I think it's the end-all be-all, because even if you look at the intensity principles that CrossFit uses, bodybuilders and other forms, you can't call it modalities. I know I'm like so like, you know, bodybuilders have been using the concepts of time under tension forever. And if you watch a real bodybuilder train for 40 minutes, it looks just as hard, if not harder, than a CrossFit class workout does. If you ask my girlfriend, I put her on a bodybuilding glute program for the past 3 weeks. She'll tell you, why is bodybuilding so hard? And I go, because you've never exercised like this when you thought of bodybuilding before. You've done your accessory movements and you've done 3 sets of 8 rows, but you've never actually touched failure.
Yeah, it's intense in a different way, right? Yeah, it's it's intense, right? But that's one specific type of stimuli. It's muscular endurance. It's testing your muscular capacity in that sense.
But it also, in the research, has what's it called? Aerobic implication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some forms.
Yeah.
Right? Like when we look at, again, not an exercise physiologist, but when we look at aerobic adaptations, like there are different things that we're trying to do. We're trying to improve stroke volume. We're trying to improve like muscles or the heart muscle size.
Yeah.
All of these different things are efficiency with that. And so it's attacking one end of that and ignoring other ends of that.
I guess what my argument would be, though, is it enough for health?
No.
You don't think so?
Because it's only addressing one root of things. Like the same way as we could say, like if you're exercising really well and you're not dieting and you're not sleeping, you're only addressing one part of the problem. I think when you look at just bodybuilding, we're only addressing one piece of the problem.
Okay, let's do this. Diet is taken care of.
Yep.
Sleep is perfect.
Yep.
You get a bodybuilder that does heavy, in proximity of failure, 3 sets of 10 back squats regularly. Is that enough for health?
Do you think that person has the ability to run a 5K if they needed to?
I do.
Really?
This is the argument that I will stand on. Yeah. Because I think so often when we look at bodybuilders and powerlifters or whatever, I think that it's not that it wouldn't be hard. It would be hard to do a 5K, right? But even for some CrossFitters, you listen to them and they're like, run a 5K? Yeah. But and we're not talking athletes. Like, we're not talking the people who are competing, right? We're just talking like regular everyday people. Yeah, I think that there's enough aerobic adaptation when you look at the literature on trained individuals, people who are doing like their 3 sets of 10, doing power workouts too, things like that. Yeah, I think that we have enough like to go off of to be like, that person could run a 5K. Would it be hard? Yeah, but
I'm not buying that.
You don't think so?
No, and I don't know if I have a specific reason to push back on it, but I have a hard time believing that prepares your system aerobically. Like, an elevated heart rate from bodybuilding style work is not the same as a true aerobic adaptation. I don't think that you're getting the sort of cardiac output improvements that you would get from doing a longer, more aerobic type of workout.
I'm not saying that they would be like aerobically trained.
Okay, so I'll ask my question differently.
Yeah.
Not can they run a 5K? Are they going to improve their time in a 5K by doing that training?
I don't think so. But if the metric is health, do we need to improve a 5K time?
I think if we're looking at,
I think the ability is more important.
Our goal over time with exercise, and this is from a CrossFit standpoint, is pushing it, is improving our health markers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think that that's a single point. I think it's a moving target of where we're going over time.
Yeah.
So I think.
But is fitness the implication for that, or is it like actual health markers?
Using fitness as a health marker.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you think that from bodybuilding alone, we can say that nutrition is taken care of, that we are improving on all of our health markers over time? Or only addressing some of them? Yeah,
so I understand where you're going with this. I think this is where I think the waters get muddy.
Yeah.
It's what is the health marker? Because fitness isn't necessarily the implication of health, right? Like if you're fit, you can probably make the assertion that somebody is healthy.
Sure.
But on the other token, there's a lot of people who are fit that are not healthy, right?
Sure.
Like you see those people who have type 2 diabetes after they've been a triathlete. You know, like they go their whole career and then they get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And that has to do with nutrition.
Because they're not approaching health, they're approaching peak performance most likely.
For sure, absolutely.
And there are things that go out the window when you do that.
100%, I agree with you. So I think that, but I don't think that fitness, here's the thing. I don't know how you get better at fitness.
Yeah.
Right? Fitness is just fitness to me. Like, there's, like, nobody has come out and said, like, and I know that CrossFit has tried to do this, but nobody has come out and said, okay, the markers for fitness are 15 pull-ups, 25, like, there's no like specific benchmarks for fitness, right?
But there are benchmark workouts in CrossFit.
Yeah, I get that.
And if you were to do them again and you improve on your times, are you not showing improvements in fitness?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Fitness, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Health.
Blood
you get
work.
what I'm saying? Yeah, exactly. No,
Yeah,
agreed.
yeah.
Agreed. That's where I think that health stands. So I don't think, though, that necessarily, like, let's say, I don't think necessarily that it means, I don't think it's necessarily that your Fran time as your average CrossFit goer getting better means that your LDL or HDL cholesterol gets lower as well. I don't think that they're hand in hand.
Sure. They could be correlative, but not causative.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I think the same thing for any type of exercise, like your regular F45 or your bodybuilder or whatever. I don't know that that's my issue. Is what is that? What's the marker?
I personally, I'm fine with people choosing whatever type of exercise they want to do. My mom likes to run. My little brother likes to bodybuild.
Yeah.
I don't have arguments with them at all about whether or not they should be doing CrossFit or not, because I think, to our point earlier, is like a barrier to entry and the ability to generally get better across the board. Like, I would rather see them do something that they love than try to force them to do something else that maybe I love, but they don't totally buy into yet, right?
That's a big portion of the puzzle. Yeah.
I think, all of the arguments in general sort of frustrate me, because I'm like, we don't have to argue over which is best. Like, if yours is best for you because you can show up and do it every day, and my version is best for me because it's what I like to show up and do every day, then we're both probably in a better spot than we would be if we were unhappy.
Absolutely.
When we go back to community, why you show up, do these things, you're always going to be more consistent at the stuff that you enjoy doing and that you're motivated by. And I think that people who do CrossFit love CrossFit so much that they're willing to die die on the field saying this is the best way to do it because it's the thing that works best for them. And I do believe that it's one of the best ways to improve from a well-rounded sense and to touch on all of this stuff. But if somebody is no, bodybuilding's getting me healthier, that's great, it probably is for them because they're bought into it and they're doing it consistently.
No, see, and again, I 100% I 100% agree with you when we're saying that, is CrossFit the modality, the thing? I think it is. I just think that there's a lot of holes in the arguments, right?
Sure.
So I'm just trying to sparse it out.
I think a thing that we can look at with this too, and maybe you would agree, maybe you wouldn't, is that CrossFit has been able to touch people from the broadest ranges of life of any of these modalities. Meaning it's not getting everybody, but it's able to get people that are 450 pounds and obese into a gym. It's getting people who were purely in an endurance sport and fell off the wagon and couldn't figure out what to do into the gym. It's able to find people from every different walk of life and find a common place where they can all come together. And I don't think something like powerlifting or bodybuilding does that as well, to touch broad ranges of populations. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that CrossFit touches a broad range of people, but I don't think it touches as many people as people would like to think. Because I think that's still your everyday average gym goer. The person who gets a personal trainer is still, that population of people I still believe is much larger than the CrossFit affiliate. So one thing that Taylor Self said to me in the DMs was, he said, I don't care about the NSCA and the professionals because CrossFit has done more to make more fit people in the world than anyone ever has. I'm like, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's even you can't put a number on that because there's no way to measure that, right? It's immeasurable.
Probably,
and people have been going to the gym for years. People have been running for years. People have so I don't know that that's true. But what I will agree with you on absolutely is that it has the potential to reach larger people.
It's this notion of, it's for anybody. It's not for everybody.
Exactly.
Right? And that's kind of our argument is it's not for everybody. That's cool. I may never convince somebody else that it's better than powerlifting.
Right.
But I know that it can be for anybody that's willing to walk through the door to do it. And I feel differently about that for CrossFit than I do about something like powerlifting, because I don't think that that's for everybody.
I agree.
Can be for anybody.
Well, the other thing is too is these other things don't claim to be modalities, right? So bodybuilding doesn't claim to be a modality, and this is one of the things that I have with CrossFit that I think is really cool. Again, why Greg Glassman is such a genius with that, because bodybuilding, powerlifting doesn't claim to be modalities. Those are supposed to be sports, right? So anyway, let's get into the sport side. If you're cool with that. All right. What differentiates the sport side of CrossFit to the public side, let's say?
I think so. First and foremost, I think the biggest difference with the sports side is the degree to which we do everything. I think we talk about CrossFit being very general. I think that the idea of constantly varied applies much more in a class setting than it does for a CrossFitter's training for sport.
Sure.
And I actually think that we generally steer back more towards strength conditioning for sport. And away from traditional methodology, which is weird for some people over time. But the idea being that when you're training in a sport, as a career, as a professional, whatever it is, we take so much time to spend in our training outside of just a 30-minute workout, a 20-minute workout, or 1 hour in the gym, that we actually are able to independently work on improving all of these things at the same time, which puts us in a position to program more linearly, more systematically for those things, from a specific sense of improving my weightlifting, and improving my gymnastics and improving my fitness across, rowing, biking, swimming, these different things. And then as we get closer to competition for sport, the idea of constantly varied comes back into the fold more, where I've taken these individual modalities and now I'm putting them back together to improve fitness.
Right, yeah.
So I think that, easy way to say it is like, I think that if you look at the methodology of CrossFit and what we see in a class setting, that magnified is what we see in competition. But the way that people approach it is more almost like looking at an Olympic cycle of periodization back to be like, okay, I have to improve all of these qualities so that I can actually excel at the sport, because you can't get better as fast just doing CrossFit workouts as you can improving the independent pieces.
Yeah, so can you give me a little idea of what that would look like in a mesocycle?
Sure. I mean, so say we've got a 12-week off season, right? I may spend the first 8 weeks of this independently building out weightlifting for snatch, clean, and jerk and back squat, right? To the point where I've hopefully improved 1RMs, but also improved weightlifting battery. So it's just like our ability to move sub-maximal loads for high repetition, right?
Yeah.
And I might simultaneously, concurrently, be building aerobic fitness across my running and different machines and everything, improving my work capacity.
Yeah.
And so as that progresses, I'm looking to sort of peak each of those qualities. And then as I get close to sport, I'm looking to integrate them again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think so. I like that you're from a traditional S&C background, because this kind of makes more sense to me. So
and this is not how everybody does it, to be clear.
Yeah.
But it's the way that makes the most sense to me. And
the best camp does it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so so the sport of CrossFit is being good at constantly varied.
It's being the best generalist in the world across the spectrum of fitness, which includes this unknown and unknowable aspect of what we might see from a weightlifting, gymnastics, and integrated perspective. Yeah.
So can you give me a little taste of how do you get better at constantly varied, aside from practicing constantly varying things? How do you know how to set time domains over a mesocycle or a microcycle even?
I think one of the things we try to do is we're always looking at limiters, right? Because every athlete has some sort of bias. Like my girlfriend Kyra, for example, is already incredibly strong. She's a pretty gifted gymnast, and she's good in a short time domain, and this is measured relative to her competition, relative to times that she's put up across the board, right? So I'm going to look at her training from a perspective of what her biggest limiters are, which are generally more aerobic type of workouts, specifically including running or anything that's in a longer time domain. And then when I'm training, we're going to bias things towards spending more time improving that and less time where I'm just trying to maintain these other qualities for them. So we have this kind of 80-20 approach to how we look at it.
Okay. Do you track volume?
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, yeah.
Generally, okay. So that's a term that I hear thrown around often in the CrossFit space, and I'm kind of I know what you're trying to say for a lot of these people, but I don't know if you really know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So are you constantly varied, let's say that are you tracking how often somebody, for example, is doing toe to bar from one week to another in constantly varied situations?
I think there's two pieces to it. One is that this is always going to be relative to the person and where they're at, right? Like you're tracking volume over time relative to what they've been capable of previously.
Yeah.
And secondarily, looking at what is kind of a generally accepted range of volume that person can tolerate.
Yeah.
So say you're a runner and you generally train for a 10K, you know that, okay, I can tolerate up to X number of miles in a week in general.
Yeah.
That's the way I'll look at things from a perspective of squatting volume or a certain gymnastics movement, how many ring muscle ups are suitable in a session or suitable in a week for this individual.
Yep.
So I look at those things. Honestly, probably most similar to something like running, where you're okay, I have to improve my daily mileage as well as my daily speed or my daily set size or whatever that happens to be.
Got it. I like that. Because when I hear this term, it's always man, this workout has a lot of volume. And I'm what the hell does that even mean? The workout has a lot of volume compared to what? You know what I mean? What do you mean? More volume just based off of what you have done? Let's say that there's deadlifts in a workout, ring muscle ups, burpees, and then let's put in an echo bike. And they're man, it's a 20-minute AMRAP. There's a lot of volume there. I'm well, that's not necessarily true, because it's dependent on what your work capacity is and how much you're actually going to get out of it.
Yep.
So I guess to frame the question better from before is, let's say the person has a capacity of 75 total bar in a workout. Okay.
Sure. What does that mean though? 75 total bar in a 5-minute workout or in a 30-minute workout?
That's a really good point and a really good question.
We could go do 250 today.
That's a very good point.
And it might take us a long time.
Absolutely. So
and that's from a strength conditioning standpoint, a coaching standpoint, you asked like how I ended up in CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I ended up here, but the reason I stayed is I feel like it's the most engaging compromise of being a sport coach and being a strength and conditioning coach that exists in the world.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I can nerd out on sport, like when I used to play basketball, at the same time as nerding out on strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
Because you look at, we talk about like volume, it's like, well, volume is relative to the time domain and the intensity of what we're being asked to do it with. And sometimes relative to the combination of movements that it's with as well. And I think that the only way to get a good feel for that is to spend a lot of time with the individuals you're trying to work with.
Yep.
And also to spend enough time around competitions to have this running memory bank of like what means high volume or low volume in a workout setting for what we're used to seeing. Because all of us are just building off of past experience. Like even Dave Castro is building off of 12 years of writing the games, and he knows like, okay, these are generally moderate loads for the athletes. These are generally heavy loads. This is generally a high volume ring muscle workout, a low volume one, and those things are moving targets over time that we're constantly trying to work towards. Like an example of this is we just did the road qualifiers a couple weeks ago, right? And one of the workouts was an echo bike and dumbbell snatch workout, and it was with a heavy dumbbell, right? Like standard RX dumbbell you'd see in class is usually 50-35. This is a 70-50. And I had 150 reps of it. So for me in the past, my brain was like, okay, 150 dumbbell snatches with a 50-35 is a high volume workout. It's something we've seen in the open a couple of times, and that's a lot of work to do. I've never programmed more than probably 100 heavy dumbbell snatches in a workout. Now having had that in Rogue, I now have a new target in my mind for what a high volume workout for that looks like. So when we're preparing and I'm building volume over time, I have to look at this from a standpoint of being like, okay, I need to get to the point where we can tolerate this amount of work because this is something that's now shown up in a competition, and I now see this as being possible.
You titrate it up over time. So my question to that too is how, so obviously, so that means that you obviously have to touch the implement like a certain amount of times, right? So in
you
terms
have to touch the pattern a certain amount of times. It doesn't always have to be the implement.
Yeah, you're right actually.
And
because you're right. I noticed something that's interesting is that I think in a lot of cases people don't understand that even volume over time can be just a movement pattern rather than just like I've deadlifted 315 for whatever. It could also be like I've also cleaned, so that pattern might get stronger. So let's use the example of total bar again, right? If we're constantly varying over time because that's what the sport requires, you have to be ready for anything. How do you get somebody to get better at total bar over a 4-week cycle? Let's just say, are you somebody who's like, this needs to get better, we're getting closer to sport, so we have to touch each movement undulated, like in an undulated way? So maybe 1 week we're doing total bar, the next we're doing GHD, the next week we're doing V-up, or how are you doing that? So
if we're talking like class setting and you're a programmer for a class, you're probably looking over time and saying like, okay, if a hip flexion based midline movement, some sort of core movement, right, is a pattern that we want to touch on, we're going to make sure that on a weekly basis or a 10-day basis that we're touching a version of that. So this week might be total bar, next week might be GHD, then V-ups, then we come back to total bar, and the idea being like, okay, I've been improving my midline conditioning through all of these different movements. Now it's showing up in the expression of toes to bar this week. Hopefully I'm better than I was the last time I did this. From a sport and athlete standpoint, we spend a little bit more time focused in on the specific movements that do show up in competition. Like if I know that I need to do well at toes to bar workouts, and historically I'm not as good at those, then I'm doing that once or twice a week in a progressive setting. So that might mean that this week I've got a workout that has intervals of it and we're doing 70 total reps. Well, next week I might do a workout that either has bigger set sizes for the same volume, or I might do more total volume of that. And I might have a second day where I'm also doing V-ups, or I'm doing GHDs, or something else that's improving midline, or maybe I have to do grip work or hanging if it's actually my forearms that are blowing up on it. So that's the differentiator with sport, is like sport, we're breaking this down from a perspective of improving specific movements that are going to show up in competition. CrossFit on a general, like on a health basis and a methodology basis, doesn't care about the movements. Right.
Dude, I love this. This is great. You're letting me nerd out a little bit, so that's cool. Okay, now the last thing that I really want to touch on is intensity.
Sure.
For the athlete. I don't know if you saw this, but there was a little bit of beef going on online too about there's this coach, I don't even remember his name. I think it might be Paul Weber. I think that might be his name. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he posted something. He read a study, and mind you, it's probably not super transferable to the CrossFit athlete because it was done on some sort like a way different sport.
Sure.
But basically, the outcomes were that it was better for these athletes to not touch high intensity super often, and that they needed to have some like down-regulated days in order to improve their overall fitness and capacity over time. How often do you think that the CrossFit competitor, let's talk off-season specifically, should be touching that red line 80 to 100% intensity opposed to like in season? I think an argument that's been made recently is like, don't tell CrossFitters that they don't need to do that because that's what they need to do. If you're not training intensely all the time, then you don't know what you're doing. You're never going to become a person to, be in the sport.
I think it's so individual.
Okay.
And I say this because there are things that play into it. Like, you and I could do the same workout, and on paper it could look like a really intense workout.
Yeah.
And the thing that limits you could be totally different than the thing that limits me.
Yeah, 100%.
And if I'm purely limited by like maximal cardiovascular intensity, that may have a certain systemic effect on me. And if you're limited by muscular capacity, like muscle endurance, that may have a very different systemic effect on you. And based on our level of fitness coming into this and our level of preparation, the amount of time that we need to recover from that could be totally individual. And so I think to say like how often somebody should touch intensity or not is unfair. And it's like and people in bodybuilding would say the same thing, right? Like I hear Mike Israetel talk about this all the time, is like our recovery curves are so different, and like you can kind of tell anecdotally how you feel going into things. I think CrossFitters can often tell like if their sleep is starting to go downhill, if their intensity in subsequent workouts is starting to go downhill, if their lifts are starting to go down. Like this could be a marker that you're touching intensity too often, or you need a little bit more recovery, or we need an adjustment. But you may have athletes that can touch on a high intensity every day of the week and they do well. Or you may have others that do much better touching it once or twice or 3 times a week and spending more time on like more aerobic base work that's sub-maximal, and that helps them bring things up.
Yeah, and intensity, in my mind, tell me if I'm wrong, is very subjective.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's intensity, like a max intensity is relative to what the task is.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is a maximal intensity for a 20-minute workout, just the same as there's a maximal intensity for a 3-minute workout, and the effects that those have on your body can be very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
For sure.
And like if you take an athlete that came from a power sport background, say they were a football player, and they're super fast twitch, and they're geared for 90-second high intensity outputs, and you put them in a max effort echo bike sprint type of workout, and then you take somebody that was a triathlete before and you put them in the same echo bike workout, where their ability to produce force might be so different that one of them's on the floor for 30 minutes and one of them can get off and feel like they could do it again.
Yeah. All right, cool, dude. Yeah, so because the thing that I like think is recovery. I'm always thinking in terms of recovery, right? So like I personally don't think that somebody should be working out at 90% intensity every single day because, again, recovery. So like if one of your goals is to get better at the clean and jerk, and you have clean and jerk the next day, and you have a really hard, or you have a Metcon on Wednesday, you have to clean and jerk on Thursday, for example. If the focus is to build your clean and jerk, is it the right thing to do to work at 90% the day before when it could impede on your workout the next day of the thing that you're actually trying to improve?
I mean, this goes on both ends, but like if we're training for sport, we organize training in a way where you're able to try to maximize each of those qualities, right? Putting your weightlifting in a position where you're fresher so that we can get the most out of that before we do something else.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, when you go into a CrossFit competition setting, the competition doesn't care how tired you are from the workout before.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? So there's an aspect of becoming familiar with training in a certain state. And it's not uncommon for athletes to be very comfortable with like, okay, what is my 85 to 95% best effort? And that's often what you see expressed.
Yeah.
Right? Like nobody's 100% fresh on Saturday afternoon after competing Thursday and Friday. And that's just part of the sport.
Yeah. I mean, your body makes the adaptations over time that
like,
it needs to.
Nobody's on the last day of the Tour de France, nobody's at the same wattage potential that they were on the first day.
Yeah.
and there's some degree of preservation that has to exist.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey man, damn, that was really good. I appreciate that, man.
Fun.
Yeah, that you covered basically everything that I wanted to talk about when it comes to programming plus some. So yeah, man, what's next for you guys?
I get to chill and enjoy myself this weekend.
Heck yeah.
We got I have an athlete competing in the Tier Cup. We're supporting a couple of athletes doing that. I got Kyra doing reps ahead on Sunday afternoon, and then we're back home and just gearing up for the next thing that comes.
Sweet, dude. Well, hey, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for hopping on.
For sure.
You guys, like, subscribe, go follow him, do all that. I'll talk to you in the next one. Bro, thank you. Appreciate it. Of
course.
That, man. That was really good. What'd you think?
That was good.